Welcome to Bedtime Tales, where every night a story waits to wrap your heart in warmth, reflection, and wonder. Tonight's story is called A Bitter Winter for Mother, a deeply moving tale of an elderly woman named Maria, whose past quietly haunts the frozen corners of a small American town. Once the proud owner of a local market, Maria now lives with her daughter and granddaughter under a leaky roof, held together by courage, memory, and the will to endure. But when an old shed goes up in flames and a photo from long ago resurfaces, the bitter winter reveals more than just frost. What happens when the child you lost walks back into your life? Can love outlive shame, silence, and time? And what would you do if the past knocked on your door after 40 years? Stay with us to the very end. Sometimes, the most beautiful warmth comes from the coldest nights. The flickering light in Maple Hollow. Maple Hollow was the sort of town where time seemed to move more slowly. Tucked away in the American Midwest, its streets were lined with weathered brick buildings, tiny diners with checkered tablecloths, and front porches that creaked with stories too heavy to tell. Winters there were harsh, unforgiving even, painting the world in shades of gray and frost. But the people endured, just as they always had. Maria Donovan lived at the edge of town, in a crumbling house that had once been cheerful yellow. Now, the paint peeled away like tired skin, and the shutters clung to their hinges by memory alone. Still, it was home, hers, her daughter Emma's, and her granddaughter Lily's. 3 generations under one leaky roof, held together by secondhand furniture, lukewarm hope, and the sort of love that didn't need to be spoken. Maria had once been the proud owner of Donovan's Market, a cozy corner store filled with handmade goods, pickles in glass jars, and bread that drew customers from neighboring towns. People used to say her cinnamon rolls could cure a broken heart. But that was before Richard, her husband, spiraled into gambling and left them in financial ruin. Before the bank letters came. Before the neighbors stopped making eye contact. Now Maria was 74, her hands stiff with arthritis, and her days spent sewing potholders for the Saturday flea market. Emma, in her late 30s, juggled part-time shifts at the diner and caring for little Lily, who had just turned 5. The child's laughter was a kind of miracle in the house's quiet. On the night it happened, the wind howled through the bare trees as though mourning something. Maria had just turned off the last lamp when she smelled it, the faint, acrid scent of smoke. At first, she thought it was just the old heater wheezing its usual complaints. But as she neared the back window, she saw it, flames licking the side of the shed. She screamed. Emma bolted from her room, Lily still groggy in her arms. "What is it, Mom?" "The shed. It's on fire." Together, they burst out into the snow-covered yard. The flames had engulfed the small wooden structure, sending sparks up into the cold night like angry fireflies. Maria stumbled through the snow, trying to reach the hose, but the nozzle was frozen. Emma wrapped Lily in her coat and screamed for help. By the time the fire truck arrived, the shed was little more than a charred skeleton. The firefighters said it could have been worse. Said they were lucky the wind hadn't shifted toward the house. Maria just stared at the blackened remnants of what had been the last place she stored anything worth keeping. Her sewing machine, old photographs, boxes of Richard's books, and, most painfully, John's letters. The next morning, the town buzzed with murmurs. Some said it was faulty wiring. Others whispered it was deliberate. Maria knew she hadn't run electricity out to the shed in over a decade. And though she said nothing aloud, a weight settled in her stomach that refused to lift. At breakfast, the kitchen felt colder than usual. Maria sat at the table, staring at her tea, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Emma stood at the stove flipping pancakes, Lily humming to herself as she colored. "You think it was just a fire?" Emma asked. Maria hesitated. "Accidents happen." "Yeah," Emma said, "but sometimes accidents are warnings." Maria didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Maria found herself alone in the yard, snow crunching under her boots. She stared at the burnt shed, the ashes still smoldering slightly. Her gaze drifted to a spot behind it, a patch of ground near the fence. Years ago, John had carved their initials into that tree. She hadn't looked at it in decades. Maria knelt slowly, her knees creaking in protest. Beneath the ashes, she found something she hadn't expected to survive. The rusted tin box where she kept her most precious keepsakes. Inside, slightly singed but intact, was a photograph of a young man with kind eyes and a shy smile. John, her John, the boy with dreams and promises who never came back. She held the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. The past wasn't buried. It had simply been waiting. By evening, Emma returned from town with a grim expression. "Tony Blake came by the diner," she said. Maria felt her throat tighten. "What did he say?" "That he's tired of waiting. He wants the money, or he's coming for the house." Maria stared out the window. Snow began to fall again, soft and silent, as if trying to blanket the ugliness of the world. But snow couldn't cover everything. "We'll find a way," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Emma crouched beside her. "Mom, we're out of time." Maria reached for her daughter's hand. "We're not out of heart. Not yet." That night, as the wind returned to rattle the windows, Maria lit a single candle and placed it on the windowsill. It flickered against the frost, a small but stubborn light. In the heart of winter, it was the only warmth they had left. Shadows from the past. The morning after the fire, Maple Hollow wore a thick coat of silence. Snow had fallen steadily through the night, smoothing over the jagged remains of the shed like a mother tucking in a restless child. But no amount of snow could soften the unease that crept through the Donovan household. Maria stood by the window with a cup of black coffee, watching as Lily made snow angels in the yard. Emma had bundled her up in layers of mismatched clothes, and her muffled giggles filtered through the glass. The scene should have brought comfort. Instead, it twisted something inside Maria, a tension she couldn't shake. She turned as Emma entered the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "The phone bill came," she said, placing on the table. "We're late." Again, Maria nodded without looking. She knew the routine. Every month was a delicate dance of shuffling what little income they had, choosing which bills could be paid and which ones would have to wait. "Tony won't wait much longer," Emma added, her voice low. Maria exhaled sharply. "He's a vulture, that man. He loaned money to the desperate, then made them wish they'd chosen hunger instead. Richard had borrowed from him near the end, a final act of recklessness that had left the Donovan women trapped in his web." "I'll go into town," Maria said, placing her mug in the sink. See if the church has any charity baskets left. You shouldn't be out in this weather." Maria gave her a tired smile. "The cold won't kill me, but Tony might." The church basement smelled of musty books and old wood polish. Maria waited in line behind a woman with 3 children, all of them wearing jackets 2 sizes too big. When it was her turn, the volunteer behind the folding table looked up with sympathetic eyes. "Maria, I heard about the fire. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Pastor Ellen. We're managing, just barely." Ellen handed her a box of canned goods, a loaf of bread, and a voucher for the community pharmacy. "There's talk around town. Some folks think the fire wasn't an accident." Maria's spine stiffened. "What kind of talk?" "Someone saw a man walking near your shed that night. Tall, heavy coat. Didn't see his face." Maria took the box and nodded. "Thanks for the food." She left quickly, her breath clouding in the icy air. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emma returned from her shift at the diner. She slipped off her coat and boots, then handed Maria a folded note. "A man came in tonight. Said to give you this." Didn't give a name. Maria opened the paper with trembling fingers. There were only 4 words scrawled in bold ink. "He remembers the scar." Her knees buckled slightly. Emma caught her. "Mom, what is it?" Maria pressed the note to her chest. "It's nothing. Probably someone playing games." Emma didn't buy it, but she let it go. For now. Upstairs, Maria sat on her bed and pulled open the drawer of her nightstand. Inside was the rusted tin box she'd rescued from the shed. She took out the photo of John and a small handkerchief embroidered with her initials. "He remembers the scar." It couldn't be, could it? Years ago, she had saved a boy's life, pulled him from the path of an oncoming car outside the market. He'd been no older than 10. In the scuffle, she'd scraped her wrist on the pavement, left a scar shaped like a crescent moon. And now someone remembered. She looked at the photo of John again, wondering how far the past was willing to chase her. A name from long ago. The snow had not stopped. It blanketed Maple Hollow in a way that muted every sound, wrapping the world in cold stillness. But inside Maria's heart, there was no silence, only the thundering echoes of the past. The note, tucked safely in her nightstand, haunted her all morning. He remembers the scar. Who was he? And what did he remember exactly? Could it be James? Emma, ever observant, noticed the faraway look in her mother's eyes. "You haven't touched your tea, Mom." Maria blinked. Saw just tired. "You've been tired a lot lately. Or distracted. If there's something you're not telling me." Maria reached out and placed her hand over Emma's. "Some stories are harder to tell when you're afraid they might break the ones you love." Emma frowned but nodded. She had learned long ago not to force the truth from her mother's lips. That afternoon, while Emma worked a double shift at the diner, Maria wandered into town. The photograph of John tucked in her coat pocket. The chill bit at her cheeks as she made her way to the old library, one of the few places in Maple Hollow that had changed very little over the years. Inside, the warmth and scent of worn pages welcomed her like an old friend. She sat in a quiet corner, took out the photo, and stared at it. The man beside her in the photo, young John, had that same kind, thoughtful expression that still appeared in her dreams. But it wasn't just the man she missed. It was the future they had planned that never came to be. She flipped the photo over. The back had once held an inscription, now faded but still legible. "To my Maria, forever yours. Love, John. Her fingers trembled. Beautiful, isn't he? Maria startled. A man in his 40s, dressed neatly in a wool coat, stood beside her. His voice was calm, yet his presence carried an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his gaze lowering to the photo. "But I couldn't help noticing. That man, he looks a lot like my father." Maria's heart stopped. "Your father?" He nodded, extending a hand. "James Cooper. I work over at Hope Freight." Maria shook his hand, her grip weaker than she wanted it to be. Maria Donovan. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he masked it quickly. "I've heard your name around town." She gave a soft, almost offensive smile. "Not all good things, I suspect." He chuckled politely. "Maple Hollow has a long memory." Maria hesitated. "You said the man in this photo looks like your father?" James took a careful breath. "He died young. I never knew him well, but I found this old photo in my adoptive mother's attic years ago. It had your name on the back. Just Maria." Maria felt her chest tighten. "What did it say exactly?" James pulled out his wallet and retrieved a folded photo, a duplicate of the one she held. He placed it beside hers. "To my Maria, forever yours. Love, John." Maria pressed her fingers to her lips. "It can't be." James looked at her closely. "There's more, isn't there?" That evening, Maria waited in the dark of her bedroom, photo still in hand. She had promised herself years ago that the truth would remain buried, that no one would suffer for what happened back then. But it seemed the truth had finally come calling. When Emma returned home, Maria met her at the door. "Emma," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." They sat at the kitchen table. Lily had already fallen asleep on the couch. "Back when I was your age," Maria began, "I fell in love. His name was John. He was kind, patient, and had a laugh that made your heart forget its sadness. We planned a future, but my family, they didn't approve. John was from another town, poor and not Catholic. That was enough for them." Emma listened wide-eyed. "I got pregnant. My parents sent me away, forced me to give up the baby before I even held him. They told me it was better that way, that no child of shame should grow up with its mother." Emma covered her mouth. "You had a child?" Maria nodded, tears escaping down her cheeks. "A son. I never saw him again. Until today." Emma stared in disbelief. "James!" Maria nodded again. "He has John's eyes, his voice, his heart. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. And then he showed me the photo." Emma's voice trembled. "He remembers the scar." Maria looked at her daughter. "That note, it was from him." The kitchen fell silent, save for the hum of the old refrigerator. "What are you going to do?" Emma whispered. Maria folded her hands. "I don't know, but he deserves the truth, even if he never wants to see me again." Across town, James sat in his office at Hope Freight, staring at the photo Maria had returned to him. His thoughts were scattered, emotions turbulent. His entire life had been a patchwork of truths half-told and questions unanswered. His mother, or rather his adoptive mother, had never spoken of his early years. The day he found the letter addressed to her from a man named John had been the first crack in the carefully preserved narrative. And now Maria Donovan, the name in that letter, had reappeared like a ghost. He touched the photo gently. "Who are you, Maria?" he whispered. "And who am I, really?" He would have his answers, even if they shattered the only life he'd ever known. The loan shark's threat, Maria had not slept. The night felt like a long breath she couldn't release. Shadows from the past swirled in her mind, but the present, stark and immediate, refused to be ignored. Tony Blake. His name still had the power to turn her blood cold. Even now, years after Richard's death, Tony's grip on their family hadn't loosened. If anything, it had grown tighter. He was more than just a loan shark. He was a predator who knew how to find the weakest places in people and push. That morning, the wind screamed through Maple Hollow, lifting small drifts of snow and tossing them across the porch like spirits refusing to rest. Maria, clutching her coat tighter, saw the black car pull into the driveway before Emma did. "He's here," Maria said. Emma, holding Lily's small backpack, turned pale. "Take Lily upstairs." Now, Maria didn't argue. Tony stepped out, all black coat and cold smirk. He walked slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world and knew you didn't. "Good morning, sunshine," he said as Emma opened the front door, blocking his path. "You're not welcome here. Neither are unpaid debts, sweetheart. But here we are." Emma stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "You made your threats. Now get off our property." Tony chuckled. "You're brave. I like that. But brave doesn't pay the bills. Your mother owes me. And if she can't pay up, then maybe there are other ways." Emma's jaw clenched. "I'll find the money. I just need more time." Tony leaned close. "Time's up. You've had years of grace. I want the house, or I want you to start earning back what's owed. One way or another, I'm getting paid." Maria watched from the upstairs window, her chest aching. She saw the fear on her daughter's face even as Emma tried to hide it. When Tony drove off, tires grinding over the snow-packed driveway, Emma didn't come inside for several minutes. She stood frozen, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. That night, after Lily had gone to bed and Maria had made chamomile tea, Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring into nothing. "He's not going to stop," she said finally. "And I don't know what to do." Maria set the tea in front of her. "We'll find a way. We always have." Emma shook her head. "We've sold everything worth selling. The car barely runs. You haven't bought your medication in months. What else do we have left to give?" Maria sat down slowly. "There is something." Emma looked at her. "James." Emma blinked. "What about him? If he truly is your brother, if he's John's son, then he might want to help." Emma frowned. "That's not fair to him. He just found out about you, about all of this. We can't turn around and ask him for money. I'm not saying we ask, but he's connected. He owns a company. Maybe he knows a lawyer, or someone who can deal with Tony legally." Emma rubbed her temples. "I don't know. Just meet him. Tell him what's going on. Let him decide." Emma reluctantly agreed. 2 days later, Emma met James at a quiet cafe near the edge of town. He was already seated at a corner table, a steaming mug in front of him. He stood as she approached. "Emma," he said, offering a tentative smile. "It's good to see you." She sat. "Thanks for meeting me." James studied her. "You look tired. We've had a rough week. Rough year. Rough decade, really." He nodded. "I know. I've been doing some research. About Maria. About John. My father." Emma looked down at her hands. "Then you know the whole story." "I know enough to be angry and sad at the same time. But I don't blame Maria. Or you. I think I just want to understand." Emma exhaled. "That's why I wanted to see you. I need to tell you about Tony Blake." She told him everything. The loans, the threats, the fire, the morning visit on the porch. James listened silently, his expression growing darker with every detail. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. That man is a criminal. Yes, but no one in town will stand up to him. He owns people, has for years. James drummed his fingers on the table. I know a lawyer. In Chicago. Tough guy. Used to work on racketeering cases. I'll call him tonight. Emma's eyes widened. James, we didn't come to ask for anything. I know. That's why I want to help. Back at the house, Maria sat with Lily in her lap, reading from an old picture book with a cracked spine. Her voice was soft but steady, the words comforting and familiar. When Emma returned and told her what James had said, Maria closed her eyes. He's a good man, just like his father. Emma nodded. He's not running away. Not yet. Maria smiled faintly. Maybe we're finally allowed some hope. The next evening, Tony returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Two of his men flanked him, silent and hard-eyed. Emma opened the door with her phone in hand. You're being recorded, she said. Just so you know. Tony laughed. What? Planning to start a podcast? I've contacted a lawyer. We're not afraid of you anymore. Tony stepped forward, but one of his men touched his arm. She's serious. This isn't over, Tony snarled. Lawyers are not. He turned and left. Later that week, James returned to the Donovan home with news. His lawyer had found records of Tony's dealings, illegitimate contracts, forged documents, and harassment complaints swept under the rug. We have enough to scare him, James said. Maybe even take him down. Maria's hands trembled as she reached for his. Thank you. James looked at her and smiled. I protect my family. It was the first time he had said it, and it made Maria weep. Whispers in the hospital. The first snowfall of February brought an eerie stillness to Maple Hollow. It coated the streets and homes in a hushed white blanket, muffling footsteps and softening the sharp edges of the world. But inside the Donovan home, tension had begun to climb again. Maria hadn't been feeling well since Tony's last visit. Her breath was shallow, her steps slower, her silences longer. On a bitter morning, Maria collapsed. Emma had just returned from the grocery store, her arms full of canned soup and Lily's favorite cereal. When she found her mother slumped over at the kitchen table, her hands still wrapped around a cooling mug of tea. Mom! Emma dropped the bags and rushed to her side, feeling her neck for a pulse. It was faint but steady. Lily, get your coat, she called over her shoulder, scooping up the phone. We're going to the hospital. The emergency room at Maple Hollow General smelled of antiseptic and worry. Nurses moved briskly, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry bees. Maria was rushed into the back while Emma sat with Lily, her fingers twitching with helplessness. A nurse approached. You're her daughter? Emma nodded quickly. She's stable. They're running some tests. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and she's dehydrated. We'll keep her overnight. Emma exhaled and buried her face in her hands. Lily climbed in her lap and rested her head on her chest. I don't want Grandma to go away, she said softly. Emma kissed the top of her head. Me neither, baby. Me neither. Hours later, Maria lay in a dim hospital room, and 4-line in her arm and heart monitor quietly beeping beside her. Her face, usually so expressive, was pale and drawn. James arrived that evening, quietly stepping through the door with a bag of fruit and a paperback book tucked under his arm. "How is she?" he asked. Emma looked up from her chair beside the bed. "Better, but tired." James approached the bed slowly and looked at Maria. "She doesn't deserve this." "No," Emma said. "None of us do." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sound, the hum of machines and the distant echo of hospital announcements. "I grew up in this town," James said at last, "but I never really belonged. Not in the way people like to pretend. My mother, well, the woman who raised me, she was a hard woman. Distant. She did her duty, I guess. But I always felt like I was someone else's story." Emma turned to him. "And now?" He hesitated. "Now I feel like I've found the missing page. And it hurts, but it also makes sense." Maria stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open. "James," she whispered. He stood quickly and took her hand. "I'm here." Her eyes searched his face. "You came back." He nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Maria squeezed his hand weakly. "I wanted to tell you everything, but I was afraid." "I know," he said. "It's okay. We'll figure it out. Together." Later, when Maria drifted back to sleep, Emma and James stepped into the hallway. "I overheard something strange," James said. Emma turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "In the waiting room, two men were talking near the vending machines. One of them said something about a deal going south. Mentioned Tony and your address." Emma's stomach dropped. "What did they look like?" "One was tall, bald, wearing a denim jacket. The other was shorter, tattoos on his neck. Sounded like they were watching your house. Or waiting for something." Emma paled. "I need to check on Lily." James grabbed her arm. "I'll go with you." They returned to the house that evening, Emma's hands shaking as she unlocked the front door. Everything appeared undisturbed. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But a folded paper was taped to the inside of the door. James pulled it down and read it aloud. "Back off or the kid gets it." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Her legs nearly gave out. James was already dialing his lawyer. This just got serious. Back at the hospital, Maria awoke to find Pastor Ellen sitting at her bedside, a gentle smile on her face. "You've had quite a scare," Ellen said. Maria nodded. "Life keeps reminding me that I'm not as strong as I once was. But you're still here, and that means there's something left to do." Maria gave a weak smile. "Like forgive myself?" Ellen reached out and held her hand. "That would be a good start. A photograph of truth." The morning after the threat appeared on the front door, Emma barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the house made her nerves jolt. James insisted on staying the night, setting up a makeshift bed on the couch with one eye open and a heavy flashlight nearby. Lily slept curled against her grandmother in the upstairs bedroom, unaware of the fear that loomed just beyond the walls. By dawn, the snow had slowed, but the sky remained heavy with gray clouds. Emma stared out the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. James entered quietly, tucking his phone into his pocket. "My lawyer is filing a restraining order against Tony Blake," he said, "and he's looped in a private investigator. If Tony or his guys come near this house again, it won't just be threats we're talking about." Emma gave him a tired smile. "Thank you, James. Really, I don't know how we'd be holding it together without you." James leaned against the counter. "You shouldn't have had to hold it together alone in the first place." Later that afternoon, Emma stopped by Hope Freight to deliver Maria's signed medical forms James had offered to help with. His office was spacious but simple. Exposed brick walls, worn leather chairs, and a desk stacked with shipping manifests and invoices. As she waited for James to finish a phone call, her eyes drifted across the bookshelves. Then she saw it, a black and white photograph, framed in a silver border, sitting alone on a corner shelf. She moved closer. In the photo, a young Maria smiled beside a man with sharp features and a quiet strength. John, the same photo Maria had clutched so tightly in her bedroom. The same man from the letter. But something else caught her eye this time. In the corner of the image, standing behind them, barely in focus, was a little boy, no more than 2 or 3, with dark hair and a curious expression. He clutched a toy rabbit and stared directly into the camera. James hung up and walked over. "You found the old photo." Emma pointed to the boy. "Is that you?" James nodded slowly. "I always thought so. That's the only picture I've ever seen of myself as a toddler. My mother, well, the woman who raised me, never talked about my early years. But when I found this, hidden in her attic, I started to piece things together." Emma's heart thudded. "Where did you get this?" It was with a box of old letters. Some addressed to a woman named Margaret, others to Maria. I think John must have given them to my adoptive parents when I was taken in. I don't know if it was formal or under pressure. I've always wondered. Emma's throat was dry. "Does Maria know about this photo?" James shook his head. "I didn't show her yet. I want to be sure. But now, maybe it's time." That evening, James returned to the Donovan house with a framed photo carefully wrapped. Maria, propped up in bed with her robe loosely drawn around her shoulders, looked up as he entered. "You're back," she said softly. He nodded and sat beside her. "I have something to show you." He unwrapped the frame and held it out to her. Maria's breath caught. She traced her fingers over the image, her eyes filling with tears. "That was the day we thought we could make it work." John had driven all the way from Ohio. We met in secret at the edge of town. I brought the baby with me, just once. Just that day. Her voice cracked. "I only held you for an hour." And then he said it was too dangerous, that my parents would never let me keep you, that he'd find someone he trusted. "I never saw you again." James swallowed hard. "I'm that baby, aren't I?" Maria nodded, tears falling freely. "I never stopped thinking about you. Every birthday, every Christmas, every snowfall." James reached out and held her hand. "I think I've always felt the hole you left, even if I didn't know what it was." Downstairs, Emma and Lily sat reading by the fireplace. When James came down, his expression was somber but peaceful. "She remembers everything," he said. Emma looked up. "Do you?" "Not really. But that photograph, it's a map to a life I never lived. And maybe now, I get to live part of it. With all of you." Lily tilted her head. "Is he staying for dinner?" James smiled. "If I'm invited." Maria's voice floated down from the stairs. "You always are." That night, they shared soup and bread and laughter over a rickety table under flickering light. The air in the house felt lighter. The future uncertain, but the family, finally, was whole. Storm at the flea market. Saturday mornings in Maple Hollow were made for the flea market. Stalls lined the town square, overflowing with second-hand goods, vintage trinkets, and the smell of fresh donuts from the church bake tent. It was a lifeline for people like Maria and Emma, not just to make ends meet, but to feel connected to something bigger than the worries that clung to them. Maria hadn't been back since her hospital stay, but that morning, bundled in her thick wool coat and scarf, she insisted. "I need to see the faces. The familiar ones," she told Emma, who was more than a little hesitant. "Are you sure? It's still freezing, and your doctor said to rest." "Resting doesn't pay for groceries," Maria quipped, adjusting her gloves. "Besides, I want to be among people again, even the nosy ones." They set up their modest stall near the corner, a folding table covered in Emma's handmade soaps, crocheted scarves, and Maria's patchwork potholders. Lily helped arrange the jars of jam they had made earlier in the week. James joined them an hour later, carrying a thermos of coffee and extra hand warmers. The foot traffic was steady. Locals wandered through, some stopping to buy, others just to chat. Maria smiled through the cold, grateful for the brief reprieve from the shadows of the past. But peace in Maple Hollow was always fragile. It started with a whisper. "That's her, the one with a gambling husband." "No, the one who gave her baby away." "Did you hear about the fire? And the threats?" Maria heard them all, but she kept her spine straight, her smile steady. It wasn't until Mrs. Margaret Cooper approached that the storm truly broke. "Maria," the older woman said sharply, her voice loud enough to draw attention. Maria turned slowly. "Margaret." The tension in the air was immediate. "So it's true then. You're playing family with the son you abandoned, making up for lost time while dragging my name through the mud." Maria opened her mouth, but Margaret wasn't finished. "You think you can rewrite history? That photo you left at the hospital? James was mine. I raised him. He had a life before you came sniffing around." Emma stepped forward, protective. "He has a right to know where he came from. And what? Throw away the woman who fed him, clothed him, paid for his schooling? He was never yours. You gave that up the moment you let him go." The crowd had begun to gather. James walked up just in time to hear the last words. "That's enough, Margaret." She turned to him, indignant. "You're defending her? After everything?" James kept his voice calm but firm. "I'm not choosing sides. I'm acknowledging truths. You raised me, yes, but she gave me life, and I deserve to know both sides of the story." "Ungrateful boy." Margaret spat. "You think you know pain? Try raising someone else's mistake." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Maria's knees nearly gave way, but Emma caught her. James stepped in front of her, shielding her from Margaret's glare. "You should go," he said, "before you say something you really regret." Margaret looked like she might say more, but instead, she turned sharply and stalked off into the crowd. The whispers resumed, louder this time, some sympathetic, some cruel. Maria sat on the folding chair behind the table, her hands trembling. "I shouldn't have come," she said. "I thought I could face it, but maybe some wounds never heal." James knelt beside her. "You don't have to face it alone anymore. That's the difference." Emma placed a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder. "We're not going anywhere." Lily toddled over, clutching a small snow globe she'd bartered for with one of the jelly jars. "Grandma, look. It's winter inside, but there's a tree in the middle." Maria stared at the glass dome, the swirling snow, the tiny evergreen beneath. It felt like a metaphor, storms raging all around, but still something rooted in the center, still something growing. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. And for the first time that day, she truly smiled. A mother's confession. The following morning, the sunlight pierced through the frost-glazed windows of the Donovan home. It was the kind of light that made the snow sparkle but failed to warm the skin. Maria sat in her chair near the window, wrapped in a thick shawl, her hands loosely folded over her lap. Her body ached from the cold, but her heart ached more from the weight she had carried for so long. She stared outside, watching Lily build a lopsided snowman in the front yard, while James helped her pat snow into a firm mound. Their laughter drifted inside, soft and sincere. It should have been different. Maria whispered to herself. I should have been there. Emma stood at the kitchen counter, preparing breakfast, but she heard her mother clearly. She turned slowly. You still blame yourself, don't you? Maria didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept watching through the window. I didn't just lose my son that day, Emma. I lost who I was. I let them convince me that I was a disgrace. A shame to the family. That giving him away was the only way to save my future. Emma walked over and knelt by her mother's side. You were just a girl, alone, pressured by people who claimed to love you. That wasn't your fault. Maria's eyes welled with tears. But I gave up. I didn't fight hard enough. Not for him. Not for John. I lived with that guilt for over 40 years. Emma reached out and held her hand. But he came back, Mom. Somehow, the universe gave you a second chance. And you took it. That matters. Maria squeezed her hand gently. I don't want him to think I left him because I didn't want him. I want him to know I never stopped loving him. At that moment, James entered the house, his cheeks red from the cold and Lily bounding in behind him. Snowman complete, he declared, brushing snow from his coat. Lily says it needs a name. Maria turned toward him with a softness in her eyes. James, can we talk? Just the two of us. He looked at Emma and nodded. Of course. They moved into the living room, settling into the worn couch as the house fell into a quiet lull. Maria took a deep breath. I need to tell you everything, she said. Not just the pieces you've heard, but the whole story. Even the parts that make me look weak. James nodded patiently. I'm listening. Maria began slowly. She spoke of her teenage years. How she and John had fallen in love under the tall oak trees in her parents' backyard. How they had talked about running away together, starting a life far from judgmental eyes. But my father was a hard man, and my mother, fearful of scandal. When they found out I was pregnant, they locked me in my room. I wasn't allowed to see John again. He tried to visit, wrote letters. My father burned them. James leaned forward, fists clenched. And when I was born, Maria looked down at her hands. They sent me to a church home in another county. I gave birth alone. They wouldn't let me hold you. I heard you cry once, and then they took you. Her voice cracked. They told me it was the only way, that a child born in sin would have no future, that I would ruin you. I believed them, and I hated myself for it. James sat silently, his throat tight. I don't know how you ended up with Margaret Cooper, Maria continued. But when I saw your name, James, and when you showed me the photo, I knew you were my baby, the boy I dreamed of every night for decades. James reached out and placed his hand over hers. You didn't abandon me. You were taken from me. And from what I can see, you spent your whole life missing someone you didn't even get a hold. Maria looked up, eyes shining. Do you forgive me? James smiled, though his voice wavered. I already did. They sat there for a long while, the winter wind pressing gently against the house, the fire crackling in the hearth. In that quiet, Maria felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. Upstairs, Lily peeked over the banister, watching them with curious eyes. Emma stood beside her, smiling faintly, her heart full. For the first time in decades, the Donovan home felt whole again. The threat returns. The hush of winter clung to Maple Hollow, but inside the Donovan home, peace had become a fragile illusion. Days had passed since the confrontation at the flea market, and although James had reassured them that legal help was on the way and security measures were improving, the atmosphere inside the house remained taut, like a string pulled too tight. Maria tried to carry on as if things were normal. She made tea. She knitted a pair of thick blue mittens for Lily. She hummed old lullabies from her youth when no one was around. But beneath the surface, her instincts churned. She had learned long ago to recognize the storm before it arrived. That storm returned the following Tuesday. It began with a single white envelope, slipped under the front door sometime before dawn. Emma discovered it just after making coffee. She bent down to pick it up, expecting it to be a flyer or some ad for roof repairs. Instead, she saw her name scrawled in thick, jagged strokes. She opened it, and the blood drained from her face. Inside was a grainy photo. Lily, on the school sidewalk, walking next to her teacher, her backpack slung low on her back, smiling. And written on the back, in crude block letters, "You were warned." Emma's breath caught in her chest. She called out to James, who came rushing into the kitchen. When he saw the photo, he didn't speak right away. He just reached for his phone and dialed. "Private investigator." "Now," he barked. Maria stood at the doorway, her hands trembling. "What happened?" Emma hesitated. Then she handed the envelope to her mother. Maria studied it for a long time, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she looked up. "It's him. Tony. This is his doing." "But why Lily?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What kind of man uses a child to make a point?" James answered, voice grim. "The kind that's desperate. The kind that knows he's losing control." 2 hours later, Officer Riley from the Maple Hollow Police Department arrived. James had already called in every favor he had. The officer took the photo, asked the usual questions, and promised to file an official report. "We'll have patrols pass by the house more often," she said. "But unless you catch someone in the act, threats like this are hard to pin down." "We're not waiting around to be pinned," James replied. "We're going on offense." That afternoon, a private security team arrived. 2 former military men, quiet and focused. They set up motion sensors around the yard, placed discreet cameras along the fence, and installed an alarm system that linked directly to their firm's dispatch center. Maria watched them from the porch, bundled in her thick coat. "It's like we're preparing for war," she murmured. "We are," James said beside her. "And this time, we're not losing." That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat in her favorite chair in the living room, a blanket around her legs and an unread book in her lap. The room was quiet but for the occasional creak of the old house. Her mind wandered. To John, to James as a baby, to Lily, whose innocence now felt like the only real light in the house, and to Emma, so strong and tired, holding the weight of 3 lives on her shoulders. She heard footsteps approaching. James entered the room, a cup of tea in one hand. "Can't sleep?" Maria shook her head. "My heart's too loud tonight." He sat across from her. "I keep thinking about how close I was to never meeting any of you. You were always a part of us," Maria said gently, "even when we didn't know it." James looked at her, his voice quiet. "I don't think I ever thank you for what you gave up, for carrying the guilt all those years." "I don't want your thanks," Maria replied. "I just want you to be safe and to know you're loved." The next morning, a second letter arrived. This one was left on the back porch, slipped under the locked door. There was no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper, taped to a piece of broken mirror. The message was simple: leave town or bury your past. James called the investigator, who confirmed the mirror piece had likely come from a car side mirror, possibly the same black van seen loitering near the house 2 weeks earlier. Emma sank into the couch, her head in her hands. "I can't take much more of this. We're prisoners in our own home." "No," James said firmly. "We're survivors, and now it's time we act like it." That evening, Maria sat everyone down at the kitchen table. Even Lily, coloring nearby, looked up at her grandmother's determined tone. "This is our home," Maria began. "It may be old and broken in places, but it's filled with love. No man with a gun or a grudge is going to drive us out. Not this time." James nodded. "The lawyer has gathered enough evidence to involve the state police. But we need your statements. All of you. Every threat. Every visit. Every photo." Emma hesitated. "Will it really matter?" "Yes," James replied, "because once we put on the record, Tony Blake becomes more than just a town bully. He becomes a case." They agreed. That night, each of them wrote their statements. Emma wrote about the fire, the threats, the photos. Maria recalled the day Richard confessed about the loan, how Tony had come calling after the funeral with no sympathy in his eyes. James included the details of the blackmail and the intimidation tactics at the flea market. Even Lily, in her own way, added to the record. She drew a picture of a black van with angry red eyes and a big X through it. She titled it "Bad Guys Go Away." 3 days later, the state police arrived in Maple Hollow. Tony Blake's house was raided. His records were seized. 2 of his enforcers were arrested on outstanding assault charges. Tony himself was taken in for questioning. The town buzzed. People whispered. Some were shocked. Others secretly relieved. The day the arrest was announced publicly, Maria stood on her front porch, watching snow fall gently across the yard. The maple tree looked peaceful, strong, unmoved by the chaos. Emma joined her, arms crossed against the cold. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Maria looked at her daughter, her voice steady. "No, but I think the fear is." That night, as they gathered around the fire, Lily in James's lap, Emma and Maria side by side, the family felt something they hadn't in a long time. Safety. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe it was fragile. But it was real. And in the heart of a bitter winter, that was more than enough. Threads untangle. It had been 1 week since Tony Blake's arrest. Maple Hollow, quiet and cold as ever, began to stir with subtle shifts in tone. Conversations at the diner were no longer hushed and wary, but laced with cautious curiosity. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid Maria and Emma now offered shy nods, as though some invisible stain had been rinsed away. The Donovan house, however, had not returned to normal because normal no longer existed. Instead, it had become a place of quiet strength. The mornings were still cold. The radiators still groaned. The floors still creaked. But there was laughter again, brief, sometimes startled, like the sound of hope learning how to walk. Lily bounced from room to room, her snow boots still dusted with salt, her drawings brighter, bolder. Emma slept through the night without waking in a panic. And Maria? She sat longer by the window, breathing. The threads of their lives, once tangled in fear, had begun to loosen. But healing, Maria knew, was not passive. It required intention, and sometimes confrontation. One such thread pulled loose the following Thursday, when a letter arrived from Margaret Cooper. James found it in his mailbox, a hope freight, a plain white envelope. Inside, 3 pages of handwritten scrawl in Margaret's sharp, slanted penmanship. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. And finally, that evening, he brought it to Maria. They sat together in the kitchen, Emma reading to Lily in the next room. James laid the letter on the table. "She wants to see you," he said quietly. "She says she owes you the truth." Maria's hands stilled on her teacup. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "She hated me. She called me a mistake." "I think," James said, "she's starting to realize she made one of her own." Maria looked down. "Is she sick?" James nodded. "Stage 4 lung cancer." She didn't say it outright, but it's there between the lines. Maria's hands trembled slightly. "I don't want her forgiveness, James. I don't even need it. But if she's asking for mine, I'll go." The meeting took place at Margaret's home, a weathered 2-story on the edge of town that always seemed to repel joy. James drove Maria, but waited outside, knowing the weight of that conversation belonged to them alone. Maria stepped onto the porch, breath clouding before her. She knocked once. Margaret answered. Her face had aged years and weeks. Her cheeks were hollow, and her eyes, once icy and unyielding, looked pale with exhaustion. Maria didn't speak first. "Come in," Margaret said, voice barely more than a whisper. Inside, the air was dry and filled with the scent of old paper and something bitter, lavender, maybe, or regret. They sat in the front parlor, across from each other like mismatched reflections in a mirror. The mother who had been forced to let go, and the woman who had held on out of stubbornness and shame. "I never wanted to raise someone else's child," Margaret began. "Let's not pretend I was kind about it." Maria said nothing. "But I loved him," Margaret continued, her voice rough. "I didn't know how to show it. I was angry that John would leave him, that your name was the only one he remembered when he cried at night, that I could never be enough." Maria's throat tightened. "I didn't ask for that baby," Margaret said. "But he was good, gentle, better than I deserved." She paused. "When he asked about his mother, I told him nothing. I thought I was protecting him, but maybe I was just protecting myself." Maria swallowed. "You had the chance I never did." "I know." Margaret leaned back against the cushions. "James has your heart, you know. Not your softness, maybe, but your persistence. I see it now. And I think he needs both of us, even if it's too late for apologies." Maria reached for her purse and pulled out a photograph. The same one from the rusted tin box. The young John, smiling, arms around her shoulders. "I kept this," she said, "even when I was told to forget him. I couldn't." Margaret took the photo, her hands trembling. Her eyes grew moist, but she didn't cry. He would have been proud of him. Of both of you. Maria stood. I don't hate you, Margaret. I did, for years. But I see now, we were both broken by the same man's decision, and by the fear of what people would say. Margaret gave a soft nod. Maybe we were. Maria walked to the door. Maria, Margaret said softly, thank you for coming. Maria paused. I wasn't here for you, she said. I came for James, to make sure this part of his story is no longer a mystery. Then she left. The next few days unfolded gently. The family returned to routines. School drop-offs, tea by the fire, cautious laughter over simple dinners. James stopped by each night, sometimes just to sit with Maria in the kitchen, listening to the radio like an old habit being rediscovered. Emma took on more hours at the diner, and the regulars began to tip better. One even slipped a note in her apron. You're braver than you know. And Lily? Lily flourished. She told her teacher about her new uncle, who brought her crayons and hot chocolate. She asked questions about how families were built, about how sometimes lost people found their way back. Maria watched it all unfold with wonder. Her life, once a quiet tragedy, was becoming something else. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. One afternoon, as snow fell outside in big, slow flakes, Maria pulled out her sewing kit and found the old, torn apron she used to wear at Donovan's market. She hadn't touched it since the store closed. She began to stitch. Emma found her hours later, the apron repaired, the Donovan's Market logo freshly embroidered over a heart-shaped patch. I want to open it again, Maria said. Emma blinked. What? Not the whole store. Just a table at the farmer's market. Maybe once a week. Cinnamon rolls. Pot holders. Jars of jam. Something to remind people I'm still here. Emma smiled. Then we'll make it happen. And they did. That spring, when the first green finally broke through the frost, the market reopened. And at the corner table, beneath a red gingham cloth, sat Maria Donovan, hand steady, smile wide, cinnamon rolls warm. People came, not out of pity, but out of respect. They came for the stories, the kindness, the quiet strength of a woman who had lost almost everything and still chose to give. The threads had untangled, not to leave things perfect, but to leave them true. And in the truest corners of Maple Hollow, Maria Donovan was home. Healing winds. The wind that blew through Maple Hollow that March was different. It wasn't the bitter, biting gusts of January or the brittle stillness of February. This wind carried something softer, something stirring. It swept down from the hills with the scent of thawed earth and pine, brushing the town's rooftops like a whisper of better days ahead. Maria stood on the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, as she watched the wind ruffle the bare branches of the maple tree. The same tree that had once hidden so many of her memories now stood tall and proud, shedding its frost-like armor. Feels like spring's trying to push its way through, James said, stepping beside her with 2 mugs of tea. Maria nodded, smiling faintly. I don't mind the cold, but I've had enough of the silence. James sipped his tea and looked at her. You haven't had silence. Maria, you've had strength, and sometimes those sound the same. She let out a breath. You're too poetic for a freight man. He grinned. Don't tell my employees. Inside, Lily was sprawled on the living room rug, drawing a house with extra big windows and a tree with pink blossoms. Emma was on the phone with the town council, finalizing the paperwork for their new stall at the Saturday market. The house felt different lately, not just safer, but fuller. Like each breath they took had more space to stretch. The fear that once clung to every corner had receded, replaced with something lighter. Healing, it didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. A good night's sleep, a kind letter in the mail, the sound of laughter returning, uninvited but welcome. That afternoon, Maria received a package. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside, a small wooden box, hand-carved, and a single envelope. She opened the letter first. "Maria, I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if it's too little too late, but I needed you to know that I never stopped wondering. I never stopped hoping you were okay. When they told me I had no rights, that your family wanted nothing to do with me, I believed them. I shouldn't have. I should have fought harder. For you. For our son. This box belonged to my mother. She always said it would bring peace to whoever held it. I don't know if that's true, but it brought me peace when I missed you most. Maybe now. It's your turn. Love always. John." Maria closed her eyes. Her fingers shook as she touched the lid of the box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a dried daisy, pressed between layers of cloth, a small silver thimble, and a photograph, one she had never seen before. John, standing beside a tree, holding a baby in his arms. "James!" Maria pressed the photo to her heart and wept, not from grief, but from release. He had never stopped loving her. Later that evening, she showed the box to James. He sat in silence for a long time, studying the picture. "I've never seen this," he whispered. "He looks proud." "He was," Maria said. "He loved you, even when the world tried to make him forget." James looked up, his eyes moist. "I always felt like something was missing. Now I know what it was." Maria reached across the table and held his hand. "It wasn't your fault. It wasn't his. It wasn't even mine, not fully. It was fear. And fear can rob us of everything if we let it." James nodded, but we didn't let it win. The next morning, the wind returned, gentle but insistent. It carried the scent of rain on its way, and with it, the promise of green things beneath the snow. Emma opened the windows to let it in. Maria baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, the smell filling the house like a memory returned. Lily danced barefoot in the hallway, and James helped rearrange the furniture so Maria could sit closer to the sunlit window. At one point, Maria closed her eyes and just breathed. She thought about John, about Margaret, about Richard, about all the loss, the pain, the shame, and how, in the end, love had outlasted them all. She thought of the shed fire, of the first cold morning when everything seemed ready to fall apart, and how somehow, brick by brick, they had built something new, something stronger, something true. That weekend, the Saturday market bustled again. Maria's table was back, checkered tablecloth, rows of jam jars, stacks of cinnamon rolls, potholders stitched with vines and birds and tiny hearts. A new sign read, "Maria's Market, handmade with hope." Neighbors stopped to greet her. Some apologized. Some simply smiled. Maria accepted all of it with grace. Emma worked the table beside her, and Lily handed out samples with her toothy grin. James stood nearby, chatting with the mayor about town permits, But every few minutes his eyes drifted back to Maria, and he smiled. "You were right," Emma said as she bagged a scarf for a customer. "About what?" Maria asked. "About not being out of heart." "Not yet," Maria smiled. "Hope doesn't grow in warm seasons. It roots itself in the bitter cold and waits for the thaw." She looked out at the crowd. The town she had once believed had forgotten her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the maple branches swayed gently in the soft wind, Maria sat outside alone. She held John's box in her lap, the photo of James in his arms still resting inside. The wind lifted the ends of her shawl and brushed her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the boy we made, for the love that outlived us, for the wind that still remembers your name." The breeze rustled the branches above her like a quiet reply, and in the hush of twilight, Maria smiled, full, whole, and unafraid. A bitter winter's end. The first warm day in Maple Hollow arrived quietly. No grand sunrise, no southern thaw, just a softness in the air that hadn't been there before. The wind that had once howled like a wounded thing now whispered gently across rooftops and porch steps. Ice melted in small, apologetic puddles. Even the trees, still bare, seemed to hold their limbs with a lighter grace. Maria Donovan stood at her front window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, watching the town wake up. The maple tree outside, once the silent witness to decades of memory and loss, swayed gently in the breeze. Its branches stretched skyward, unburdened by snow for the first time in months. The bitter winter was fading, and something new was beginning. Emma was in the kitchen preparing toast while Lily, dressed in a sky blue jumper and yellow rain boots, bounced from room to room with a wild energy only springtime and 5-year-olds seemed to share. "I'm bringing my lantern to school today," she announced proudly, holding up her cardboard and glitter creation from last week's class project. "It's for the Hope Parade." Emma smiled as she buttered toast. "Just don't swing it around like last time, or you'll be parading glitter into Mrs. Deacon's hair again." Maria chuckled from her seat. "Let her light shine, Em. Just maybe not in someone's scalp." They all laughed, a soft, rolling sound that filled the kitchen like birdsong. James arrived just after breakfast. He'd begun stopping by more regularly, some days with groceries, other times just to sit on the porch and talk. Lately, it felt less like he was visiting and more like he was home. "I brought something," he said as he walked in, brushing the last chill from his coat. Found it while sorting through some boxes in storage. He handed Maria a small, weathered frame. Inside was a photograph neither she nor Emma had ever seen. It was James, maybe 3 or 4, sitting on a man's lap, his face turned up in admiration, the man's arm around him protective, strong. "That's John," Maria whispered. James nodded. "I don't remember that day, but I remember how safe I felt around him, even when I didn't know why." Maria ran her fingers along the glass. "He loved you. So much. I used to wonder if that was enough, but maybe it really was." That afternoon, Maria walked into town for the first time without Emma or James at her side. The sun was out. The sidewalks were wet with meltwater, and though her pace was slow, it was steady. At the market, she set up her table again. It was modest, just a few jars of jam, some hand-stitched potholders, and 2 trays of her now famous cinnamon rolls. But the people came. They didn't come to gawk or to whisper. They came to say thank you. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for coming back. One woman brought a handwritten card. Another pressed a $5 bill into Maria's palm without taking a thing, saying only, "For your light." Maria didn't cry. She just smiled and added that bill to her little cash box with a gratitude too deep for words. That evening, back at home, the whole family sat outside for the first time in months. James fired up the grill. Emma opened a bottle of wine. Lily danced through the grass with bare feet and arms wide open, chasing the breeze like it was made of gold. Maria sat in her rocking chair, her latest quilt across her lap. It was nearly finished now, stitched from old clothes, scraps of market linens, even a torn corner of Lily's baby blanket. Each piece told a story. Each stitch was a step away from the past and a step toward something better. "You know what I've learned this winter?" Maria said softly, gazing out toward the maple tree. Emma looked up from her glass. "What?" "That surviving isn't about waiting for spring. It's about finding reasons to sing anyway. Even the cold. Especially in the cold." James nodded slowly. "You've always been our song, Ma." Lily ran up and hugged her grandmother's leg, eyes bright. "Grandma, are you going to live forever?" Maria laughed, a rich, full sound. "No, baby, but I'll be here. In the stories, in the roles, in the hugs, in you." The fireflies blinked to life in the dusk, and somewhere in the distance, the wind turned warm. Thank you for spending time with us and listening to A Bitter Winter for Mother. This was not just a story about hardship. It was a story about love, the kind that survives silence, separation, and even time itself. It reminds us that no matter how cold the winter, warmth can still be found in forgiveness, in family, and in the courage to keep going when the world has forgotten your name. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who may need it, or subscribing so you don't miss our next tale. And if you've ever had a winter of your own, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest seasons. Until next time, may you always find warmth, even in your bitterest winters.